2020 brought on the FMCSA Clearinghouse, amongst all the other things that have happened this year. And in the following months, after January 6th of 2020, the Clearinghouse just completely turned upside down. The federal systems canceled, your FMCSA portal accounts crashed, and it was a complete disaster. However, unlike the rest of 2020, the Clearinghouse is finishing up strong. So if you don't know the information on the Clearinghouse, you are not going to want to miss this video. I'm going to get into all the details. Welcome back to D.O.T. University. I'm Ryan, the D.O.T. guy. Go ahead and help us out. Hit that like and subscribe button and ring that bell so that you and your team can be notified when we're coming out with new content that can help you stay off the radar. "2020 brought us this crazy year, and it all started with this, the FMCSA Clearinghouse. And those of you who have been trying to use it and have been with it since the beginning, you know exactly what I mean. This program started on January 6, 2020, and it had the best intentions, and boom, right out of implementation, it just crashed every federal system that was out there in the trucking world. This program was an absolute nightmare. But the FMCSA has been working on it, and through the course of the year, it's about the only thing that's running smooth now that the government's put out for us. All right, hey, we're going to get into this FMCSA Clearinghouse, and there's a lot of companies that just never really got this whole program up and running. There's a lot that did get it up and running, but if you're one of those ones that's still looking for some information out there, if you haven't done any of your pre-employment queries, if you haven't done your limited queries that you're required to do, make sure that you pay attention to this whole video. I'm going to get you all the information here quick and heavy right now. Now, here's the deal. The FMCSA Clearinghouse is applicable for your CDL drivers. Now, in our overall compliance programs, remember, non-CDL drivers, we still have D.O.T. rules and regulations they have to adhere to, but the drug and alcohol portion in Part 382 of the Code of Federal Regulations is only applicable to our CDL drivers. So that means the Clearinghouse is only applicable to our CDL drivers in our team. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about registering, some policy procedures, completing queries. I'm even going to show you some statistics of where we're at in the year so far of these positive results that have been provided. So first of all, what is the Clearinghouse? Well, it's this big national database that the feds put together. And they've been talking about it for years. I remember back in 2003, they were talking about doing this new database, and it was going to be, oh, in 2 years it's coming out. And then in those 2 years, they said, oh, it's going to be another 2 years. And this went on and on and on and on. Here it was, 2020, and the thing went live. What it is designed to do is to go through and capture your positive tested drivers. Now, maybe you have a positive tested driver and you didn't even know it. Drivers have for years been able to run and hide from these positive tests, and you unknowingly hire them and you put them to work, and next thing you know, someone's calling you up and saying, hey, you're using a driver who's tested positive for cocaine. Or worst case scenario, that driver got into a crash, and later on in huge civil litigation, you're finding out, oh, that was a positive tested driver. You shouldn't have been using them in the first place. Well, that's what the Clearinghouse was designed for. It's designed to catch those drivers that have a violation of the drug and alcohol prohibitions so that you can track them and prevent them from driving your commercial motor vehicles. The FMCSA has this website, and you can find it really easy. It's just clearinghousefmcsa.dot.gov. Now, if you don't want to write that all down, that's super easy. Just type in Clearinghouse into the website. Now, you're going to get a couple different options. One's going to be the Publisher's Clearinghouse. You can always apply for that. Maybe a win, but this is the one you're looking for. It'll be probably either the first or the second option. It'll be the FMCSA Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So you just click on that, and that'll bring you to this link right here for the actual Clearinghouse. Now, they've got a lot of information in this. This is where you will come to log in unless you have an FMCSA portal account and you've been using that. However, we don't really recommend in the beginning, especially for smaller companies, to try to tie the Clearinghouse to the portal because they still kind of do have some issues in there. But you can come in here, you can register. All you got to do is just click up here on the top on this registration link, and that's going to take you directly to registering. But this is the Clearinghouse site. A lot of great information on here, a lot of facts and a lot of learning. You can click on the Learn tab. That'll take you to a lot of little different information that you have. But this is where you will go to go through and get registered. Now, once you've registered for the clearinghouse, the records are maintained. You have to keep on those drivers, within their files, and that you're going to keep that anytime you have an application, a driver applicant that comes in. You want to maintain those records, and you're going to, when you run the queries, you want to make sure that you have those also copies of them in your files within that system where I showed you where you would log in. Now, here's the deal. If you're using a third-party TPA service or something like that, they can help you. I know my company, Front Range Compliance, we run a nationwide third-party drug and alcohol testing program, and we help all of our clients with the clearinghouse. We try to give you the easy button for this overall program, and my administrators of the program are absolutely top-notch to make sure that they keep you out of trouble with the feds. So here's the deal. Once you get registered in there, you have some additional employer or responsibilities as an employer. Number one is going to be making sure that your new hires, your CDL drivers that come in for a job, number one, they have to have an account in the clearinghouse. So instead of bringing them in, having them fill out applications, the new rule on clearinghouse is you can't even consider them for employment unless they have already registered. So you got to ask that question right off the bat. Do you have a clearinghouse account? Then you have to do that initial query, that pre-employment screen, that pre-employment query, and make sure that that driver doesn't have a prohibition in the program. If they come back prohibited, that means they're restricted from driving. So again, that's now going to be your step one anytime you hire. So you want to gather the driver's CDL numbers and their state of issue, because again, on the new forms for drug and alcohol, we have to supply that information, and you also want to be tracking that. You want to make sure that your TPA service is registered. Now, here's the deal. Don't just assume that your TPA service is doing anything in that program. You need to check with them, because a lot of companies are finding themselves in hot water because they think, oh, well, our third-party provider was doing it. That's your consortium, your random pool, your drug and alcohol testing company when I say TPA. So again, you want to make sure that they're helping you with that. I know we're helping our clients, but I know that there's a lot out there that aren't doing anything with that. Now, you also want to make sure that you're gathering information about your drivers, because in the event that you have to report something to the clearinghouse, you've got to make sure that you are providing some really clear and solid evidence to support the reason that you're saying that there's a violation. Now, here's the deal. Pre-hire query, just like I already talked about, whenever you hire somebody, you have to do the query. Now, this eventually, by 2023, is going to replace that safety performance investigation that you do to the last 3 years of previous employers. This goes through and it'll replace that form of, has the driver tested positive as they refuse to test, so on and so forth, by 2023. As of right now, you still have to be doing that. So when you first hire somebody, you're going to do a pre-employment full query on them. Now, remember, that has to be acknowledged by the driver and consent given from the clearinghouse account. So they have to be able to log into their own account. If they don't have an account, then they can't do that. So this is why it's so important that you get your drivers registered, your CDL drivers all registered for that clearinghouse. Now, after you get past that and all your employees that you have working for you, this is where the annual query comes in. Now, this is referred to as a limited query. Now, very important. Okay, if you take anything away from this, you want to remember right now, as of January 5th is the last day you have to get your annual queries done. January 5th of 2021. That is going to be the last day. So you've got to make sure. And the reason it's January 5th is because the whole thing went live on January 6th of this year. So you have to run that limited query on every CDL driver you have in your employment. Now, there's no limit on how many times you can run these limited queries. You can run them as often or frequently as you want. Here's the deal. They're $1.25 a piece. So if you've got a fleet of 10 drivers, that's a pretty low cost. But if you got a fleet of 1,000 drivers, that'll start to add up, pretty quick. So no matter how you run it, you just want to make sure in your policies, you explain how you're going to be running those queries. Now, on a limited query, you can get consent, can be written. That's the written out form, and I'm going to have a separate video just on the limited query consent and completing the limited queries. But you can have consent in that file, and it can state in there that it's good, the consent is given for the entire term of their employment. So you don't have to regather that document every year. So then from there, you're going to run that limited query. Now, if the driver, this is also something very important. One of the reasons you want to make sure that your drivers are registered, because if it comes back and finds a prohibition on a driver, then it's going to go through and seek that driver. It's going to notify them of the violation, and then they in turn have to grant you access for the full query. You have 24 hours to do that full query. If you can't get it done and get it resolved within 24 hours, you absolutely have to take that driver out of safety sensitive function. They can no longer drive. So you got to make sure that you pull them out. So now remember, your limited queries at a minimum are done annually. That written consent is provided from that driver. If you haven't done the consents, it's time to have a group safety meeting and make sure everybody signs one of these forms so that you can put it in their files. Now remember, don't ever backdate anything because that's what gets you in trouble. Just date it the date you get it filled out. It's best that you get it in that file though. So make sure that you're having those forms. So here's the deal, the queries. We have a few different ones. You've got a full query, okay? You have a full query that can be run on pre-employment and it can be run after a limited query. And then you have the limited queries. So you want to make sure that with those queries, again, that you're running the correct one. I get some people that says, well, Ryan, can I just run full queries all the way around? You sure can. There's nothing saying you can't run a full query, but remember, those require the driver to individually consent in their system. So you can run a big batch of limited queries, and then it'll only double back and run a full query if that driver has some type of restriction found or a violation found within their drug and alcohol testing restrictions. So it's going to be way less time consuming for the annual sense just to do that limited query. Now here's the deal. You can have your TPA service, your third-party services like Front Range Compliance. We can do those for our clients. We run them, we keep them up to date, so on and so forth. What we are prohibited from doing as a third party, though, is purchasing your queries for you. Now, this is actually, I think, a really good thing because what happens is those queries, they cost $1.25, and that prevents all those spammers. And if you got a D.O.T. number, you know what I'm talking about. You got spammers, scammers, and emailers and texters. They're all saying you got to do this, that, and the other thing, and they're way jacking up the prices on that kind of stuff. So it's make sure your TPA, they're doing it for you. If you need a TPA, give me a call. Now, here's the deal. The other things that we have to report on, you have some reporting requirements, and that's going to be anytime you have a driver, CDL driver, who tests positive, okay, and then within 3 days, we've got to notify them. Now, here's the great thing, is the MROs are going to do the reporting for you on their end. That's when the test comes to the laboratory. But you yourself are going to have to do the test or the reporting, for the alcohol. So when you have an alcohol test of BAC, a 0.04 or greater, you have to report on that. Anytime you have an alcohol test or a drug test, it's a refusal on your end. That means you ask the driver to go through and do the test, and then he or she said, nah, I'm not doing the test. Then you're gonna report that as a refusal. Or maybe you have something else that happened that led up to the refusal on your end. Once they report for the test and they start to provide the sample and something happens from that point forward, that's when the MRO is going to report for you on the situation. Now, the other things you're going to report on are actual knowledge. If you have actual knowledge of a drug and alcohol, either pre-duty use of either alcohol or controlled substances, and then again, the completion of the follow-up. When that driver completes their very last follow-up test, you're going to go ahead and report that to the actual clearinghouse. So overall, what gets reported, any positive tests, any actual knowledge situation, the substance abuse professional will report where they're at with their standings when the driver goes through and takes their test. The return to duty test will be reported, and then the completion of the follow-up. So when you're running your queries, you can see where they're at within that overall program. And remember, if you have to report something such as pre-duty use or something like that, you're going to want to make sure that you have good documented evidence. So make sure your employees are filling out those forms for reasonable suspicion, or if you had a situation where a driver got into a DUI accident and you couldn't do a test, but he or she got booked for DUI, you want to make sure that you're reporting on that the best you can and provide whatever documentation that you can get or reporting on what you can get. So other employer requirements, things that you have to do, is you got to update your policy. Now, this one gets overlooked by everybody. We're still going into companies and we're still seeing policies from 2005 or later. We're still seeing 2-paragraph policies. Now, here's the deal. Your D.O.T. drug and alcohol policy should be probably about 18 to 20 pages. With the addition of the clearinghouse, we're looking at probably 2 more pages that we have to add to it, but you have to get that updated. And when you do update it, you need to give the update to your drivers and make sure that they sign a receipt, okay, showing you what that update was, and acknowledging that they have received a copy of it. Now, don't just give the policy. Make sure that you train the policy also. And then you got to notify the drivers of the clearinghouse. Now, technically, you should give them 30 days notice, okay, of the policy and training on the clearinghouse before you're doing those limited queries. But as of right now, the clock is ticking. Just get the information, and if you haven't registered, get your company registered and get going within that program. Okay, driver information. Your drivers must register. Okay, now we get a lot of situations, a lot of questions on this. Well, do I have to register my drivers? So here's the deal. Absolutely, you have to register your drivers if they were employed by you, okay, on or after January 6, 2020. If they started working for you before that and they've been gainfully employed by you ever since, then they don't have to register technically. But here's the deal. That technically can turn ugly really quick, because if they happen to get a positive test somewhere or had something happen, then it's going to come back in the system and it's going to automatically, or it's going to be needing to search for that driver, and they're not in the system. So that driver is going to get notified through the snail mail. Whereas if they have a situation that happens, and they're registered, they're going to, like, if a record gets uploaded on their account, they're going to get notification on their account, which in turn will send them an email. So it kind of speeds up the whole process. So I definitely encourage you to get them registered. Plus, remember, you only got 24 hours to get something figured out if a driver comes back with a record. Well, we've all seen records land on a driver before. Look at the MVR histories and stuff like that it didn't necessarily belong to them, or the DMV made a mistake, whatever the case could be. So those little things are going to happen. So you want to make sure that you are getting them registered, help them registered so that they are in there. And that way it makes the transition. If you need to convert a limited query to a full query, you're ready and it can happen. Now, I just want to show you a couple statistics that we have in the FMCSA Clearinghouse. Number one, this is going to be the registrations, who all is registered, and this has been for 11 months, kind of where we're at. So you can see we have the user registrations as of December 1st of 2020, kind of where we're at. And it says overall driver accounts, 1.45 million driver accounts. So that seems a little low to me with all the trucks out there. It could be quite a few drivers, but we have, I think, a lot of existing drivers that haven't registered. So again, just encourage those drivers to register if they have not. This one shocks me. Employer accounts. We have 176,000 employer accounts. We have we're almost ready to tip the scale at 4 million D.O.T. numbers, and we only have 176,000 have registered for the clearinghouse. So again, if you don't know what the clearinghouse is, give us a call, give us a shout, shoot us an email, comment below. We'll get you some information to get you helped out. Overall TPAs, those are companies like me, Front Range Compliance Services, that have 12,946. That's quite a few. I would imagine that that's somewhere pretty normal. MROs, SAPs, I'm not too worried about those numbers. Kind of coming down, seeing these again, it seems pretty low. Okay, looking at the queries that we have out there within the clearinghouse, okay, you can see there's been kind of a trend of the queries the upward 69,000 queries. So think about the number of jobs that are out there and those full queries. That's going to be where somebody has ran a query. Maybe they were supposed to do a limited, they decided to do a full, or maybe that was a limited query that transitioned and they had to do a full query. So you can see over pre-employments in the last 11 months, there was 1.29 million pre-employment queries that were done out there. And overall today so far, we're at 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million limited queries that have been done. And you can just kind of see the trends as they're kind of going up. You notice on this limited query, it's really climbing right now. That's because we're at the 1 year mark where every motor carrier has to do that limited query for their company. So make sure you follow this video up with the video on completing your limited queries. Okay, let's talk about some of the violations that have been reported within here. I found this pretty interesting. You've got some drug and alcohol. You can kind of see the trends. Overall number of violations reported in the last 11 months of positive drugs and alcohol is 50,000. Okay, obviously the most of those were for controlled substances, but again, 1,099, almost 1,100 violations for controlled substances. But if you scroll down through the rest of these statistics, you can kind of see where some of these numbers are at. Now, I'm not going to go through all these with you where it shows you where each of those positives were, but I did find this next bit of information that the feds provided quite useful, or pretty interesting. Kind of focuses where companies we need to do our training at and our awareness at. You can see overall for the tests that we have, by far the highest amount of testing that or positive tests that we see is the 26,000 that we see for marijuana. You see for cocaine, we had about 7,200. For amphetamines, 4,400. And then we get down here into the opiates, from the codeine down to the different types of opiates we have. We're right around 3,000-4,000 in that area. Coming down to the rest of this, we've got some meth and some things like that. You could see for methamphetamine 4,700, and then it kind of goes down from there. Look at this one. I thought the PCP died in the 1980s, but look at that, 118 drivers have tested positive for PCP. So a grand total of positive tests for 50,627. So these queries that you do, so you can report on all those tests that we were just looking at, they do cost $1.25 a piece. Again, you purchase them, us TPA service providers. We don't purchase those for you, but that's just to help to protect you. And then again, you want to make sure that you're getting registered, you're running your queries. And if you need help, we're here for you. Look us up, send us an email at info@frontrangecompliance.com. Contact us for any assistance, programs, or questions that you might have regarding the FMCSA Clearinghouse. And as usual, stay safe out there. We are coming up on Christmas and this holiday season, so hope everybody stays safe and warm through this holiday season. And hopefully this new year coming in 2021 is a lot better than the last one. We'll talk to y'all soon.